All right. So Dr. Musangala here. This is a recording for my Counseling 5850 class. And I'm doing this for those that weren't able to make the session yesterday. I hold office hours every other Tuesday from 5 to 7 p.m. Central Time. But I recognize that some people have commitments that make it impossible for you to join me at that time. So um, a number of questions came up, and I just wanted to go over a few of the things that I discussed at yesterday's office hours. In case it's helpful to anybody that's working on their proposal and has questions that are similar to what was brought up yesterday. So, um, first thing is this week you're doing the program evaluation chapters. So take a look at that. I hope you've read your chapters already. And if you have any questions, concerns, feel free to send me an email. And then you also are welcome to utilize one another as a resource. But anyway, getting into it, I want to talk about your proposal. And hopefully this will help you as you put together your final paper, the one that you submit in week 8 or 9, the final week that you submit your final research proposal. So remember, this is a long project that's broken down into various components that allows you to write your chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 3 over time and submitting bits and pieces of it. And your final submission will be all of it together that you will edit and compile in your final submission. Now, all of the pieces that you're doing up until then are an opportunity for you to share with me your work. It helps keep you accountable and also just helps you stay on track so you're not waiting till week 8 and 9 to be writing the whole thing. So just sort of breaking it down into different components that you do and submit for review. I am looking through those and giving you feedback. I am not grading those very harshly because the idea is that it's a work in progress. What I'd like to do is really take a look at that. A lot of my comments have to do with structure, much of it about writing. I think the pieces about your design, we've addressed that very much. Your research question and things of that nature. We really sort of talked about that in week 1 to 3 during our office hours, and also the discussions that you had to engage in, and also your week 1, 2, and 3 submissions where I gave you feedback about your research questions. So I feel that most of you have a handle on that part. And now it's really just about putting that to paper and writing it out. And so my feedback is mostly about your writing. And I may have a few questions here and there that about your design. How are you going to do this? How are you going to operationalize a particular variable that you have included? Or maybe something that feels to be a bit too big and not particularly doable in the kind of the scope of proposal that you're putting together. So that's the kind of feedback I'm giving you. And so what you have submitted, I know people have wondered, it doesn't have to be perfect. I am very much about the idea of scaffolding, that everything builds upon everything else. So you give me that, I look at it, I share that back with you, and then you get the next piece in. And as you then put all of these together for your final proposal, at that point, you should have been able to incorporate the feedback that I have provided you, the feedback that you have heard from your peers in the discussion groups. So that should then all be evident in the final proposal. Another question. So, before I go there, so this is all a work towards the final thing, but you're taking smaller steps to get there. And the smaller steps, so the points you get for your current submission are not for a job that's greatly done, although many of you have outdone yourselves, but it's really for are you on track? Are you asking questions that you should be asking? Um, a question that came up was, so given that your, like your chapter 3 and 4, for example, or 2 and 3 build upon your previous submissions, when you do your Turnitin, the percentage, originality percentage, and could be, or the percentage of material that's not original could be pretty high, because Turnitin retains all of your previous submissions and it compares that. So you might have a really high percentage. I normally take a look at I can go in and just do some analytics and see what is the original content and what is not original. If it's your own work, it will say a student paper that was submitted previously. It wouldn't identify the student, but it will say a student paper submitted to X and Y university. And in that case, then I know that is work that you've done previously. So that it's pulling that already. So then I calculate the originality percentage excluding. So I can do that and turn it in and ask it to exclude material that is part of a paper that you previously submitted. And then your originality score will be, it's not going to be, it's going to be in a safer zone at that point. So as long as it's your own work, if you're citing work that you've submitted previously for this class, not for previous classes, because again, I have a time frame. Even when I look at those, I can see the time frame when this work was done. So you can't just recycle a paper that you did previously. But anyhow, I think the way that this class is set up and the project that you're working on does not necessarily allow you to recycle previous work from previous classes. So hopefully that lays that question to rest. The last thing I want to address is it seems that there's still an issue with variables, the understanding of variables. Yeah. I just want to, it seems people are struggling to understand the different kinds of variables that you have as you put together your research. So I'll just do a quick overview of your independent variables, your dependent variables, and then your other things like extraneous variables. And using an example, for example, an example that we talked about yesterday, and I know she won't mind my using her example because she discussed it and said that I could. I think one of the students, for example, is proposing to do child-centered play therapy and to look at the impact of child-centered play therapy on particular behaviors among children. Let me see what those behaviors are that she had proposed. Child-centered play therapy and where is that? Child-centered play therapy. So let's say child-centered play therapy and that it will improve children's behavior, or why can't I think what that piece was? Let me find it because I want to use that example. Okay, here. All right, so child-centered play therapy, performance on certain behavioral observations, behavioral measures. So maybe some of the behavioral measures could be used. So you have to think about, so child-centered play therapy is a thing that you're going to implement. You're going to offer this, right? And this becomes your X that you're going to implement, or the treatment, that is your independent variable. So the treatment, when you introduce a program, that becomes your independent variable. And you're looking to see the effect of that independent variable on Y. Y, which will be impacted to whatever degree or not impacted by the thing that you introduce, is then your dependent variable. So in this particular case, child-centered play therapy is the independent variable, and you're looking to see how it affects performance on behavior, or behavioral observations on children at second grade kids, for example, right? So then the behavior that you're observing is the dependent variable, because you're saying that by introducing child-centered play therapy, these children's behavior will change in, that we will observe some changes in their behavior. So the thing that you expect to see change based on another thing that you introduce then becomes your dependent variable. Now, in this case, some of the questions you have to think about is, how are you going to define your dependent variable? So what kinds of things are you going to observe? So when you talk about performance on behavior, how do you define that? How do you measure it? Are there things that you could use as indicators of performance on behavior? So, for example, it could be children being sent to detention, um, children having to be maybe sent to the principal's office, or any kind of intervention, so that you're expecting to see a reduction in those kinds of referrals or interventions. There'll be fewer detentions, in class detention. There'll be fewer out of school, whatever it is, right? There'll be fewer instances where children are, maybe there's a system where children earn points for behavior. Maybe you're going to see an improvement in the kinds of points they earn because they're going to behave better. So what's the behavior that you're going to be observing, and how will you make note of the changes? So in this kind of research, then you're thinking about, you probably want to see your baseline. So you might have an instrument, an assessment that you're going to use to be your indicator, because again, you're saying you're going to see some changes in behavior. So changes from what? So that's why you establish your baseline, so that you understand your first point of assessment becomes your baseline. So then you have an instrument that you conduct. So that might involve looking at current data. What is the level of referrals? What's the level of behavioral things that children are getting referred to the counselor? Or if there's a way that they earn points for something, how are they doing? So there is a measure already in place. Then you implement your child-centered play therapy, which is your independent variable. And, over, say you're going to do that over 10 weeks. You want to be clear about the intervention and how you're going to, again, manipulate that. And then you're going to conduct the assessment once again, a second point in time, where you conduct the same assessment, collecting the same data, and then you go in and compare what changes do we see during that period of time between the first point of measurement and the second point of assessment. What are the changes? In what ways has that dependent variable changed? Now, so in that case, you've talked about instrumentation. That's the instrument, the assessment that you're using. You've also talked about your population. Your population in this case is maybe second graders in a particular area. How are you going to find a from that population? The population is a larger entity. How are you going to sample them? How will you decide? Maybe you have a school district, or you're going to focus on one or two school districts, and you will approach the school counselors there, or the teachers, or school administration, and say you want to conduct this assessment with second graders. What are some things that can affect? So you might see some changes in behavior, right? Those behavior measures, you might see some changes, but how do you know that those changes can really be attributed to the child-centered play therapy that you have introduced? Are there other things that might affect the outcome? Maybe you have a class A, you see a ton of improvement, and then class B, you don't see much change. Or one class, maybe their behavior actually goes the way that you didn't anticipate it. So to what can you attribute the changes that you're observing? Is it because of child-centered play therapy, or could there be other things? Could there be extraneous variables, other things outside of the independent variable that have an impact on the outcome? An example is, so maybe with one school, you go there early in the morning, their first period, you're doing your child-centered play therapy. And maybe play therapy was not a good example, because then that may be more individual. But you're doing something, an intervention very early in the morning. Kids are alert. They're not tired. The other school, you're going after lunch and doing the same thing. And in another school, you probably go in the middle of the day. So could they respond differently because of the time of day that you go in? Right? Are they distracted if you're going closer to the end of the day? Are they tired, wanting to go out to recess? And that maybe affects their ability to concentrate or focus on the child-centered play therapy. That's one. There might be other things at play. that, one child could be coming from a home where they are really having a lot of problems. Maybe they've gone hungry. Those are all things that are extraneous variables that could serve as limitations to the things that you're observing. There are things you don't know about the environmental factors that these children are exposed to that may have an impact on the observations, so that the changes that you observe in behavior may be the result of so many other things, and they're impacted by so many other things that you're not aware of, or that you're aware of but have no control over, right? So, in that case, then we've talked about extraneous variables, and also that you could discuss those as limitations. What are the things that if you were to do this in a perfect world, right? If you're going to implement this research in a perfect world, how would you design it? What are the things you would make sure were uniform or were in place, so that then you could be sure to say that I saw Y change this way, and I know that is because of the intervention that we put in place. So the limitations then becomes the things that you are aware of, or might not be aware of, that that can cause differences or changes that can interfere with the process or with your findings. Okay, so talked about limitations, talked about population and sample, talked about so that's all in your methodology, actually. So that those are the things that you're talking about in chapter 3. So chapter 3, you're defining, this is the whole methodology that includes you talking about so if we back up a little, you had talked about chapter 1, your rationale, your research question. You came to chapter 2 and said, this is what we know about it. This is why it's important to study this. This is what literature is telling us. And this is what we still don't know. And so I'm going to have this question so that I can find out about this thing that still isn't answered in the research. And then you go to chapter 3, which is, this is how I'm going to do it. Okay. And you have your methodology where you're talking about, these are your variables, these are your independent and dependent variables. These are the instruments that I'm going to use. Are they valid? Are they reliable? Do you have information about the psychometric properties of these assessments? You should have done that in your Counseling 5220, where you talked about the properties, psychometric properties of an assessment, reliability, validity, and so that's information that you would then look at. You want to know, how good are these instruments? If you're going to be adding, like a demographic survey or questionnaire, what pieces are you going to introduce, and why is it important to get this information, right? So socioeconomic data, race and ethnicity, gender, these all kinds of things, age, that you probably want to add in your demographic survey, but there has to be reasons why you're including that. You're not that there's got to be some good justification that I think this may have a bearing on the thing that I'm looking at. So I'm going to ask about age. I'm going to ask about socioeconomic status. I'm going to ask about household information that you might be able to obtain as well. If you're working with children, one of the things you have to put into your methodology is think about, how do you obtain consent, right? How do you obtain consent? Even if you're not working with children. So with children, obviously, you're going to have consent of the parental figures. How are you going to do that? If it's through a school, what is the process through which you're going to get the permissions that you need so that you can reach your target population? Working with adults, any human subjects, you have to go through the IRB. So make sure you're factoring that in. You don't have to write out your detailed IRB, but you want to be sure that you're mentioning that because it's an important part of the process. So I think that's about it for now. I'm going on to 20 minutes. I decided that I would offer another another office hour next Tuesday. I do them every other Tuesday, but just given where we are and that people might need to consult, there are people who have come to my open hours, and there's some people who have not come at all. I keep offering that. Don't struggle, or send me emails if you have questions. But sometimes talking this through for just 10 minutes, you might find that it's helpful. So that you can't say that you didn't get the help you needed, that I wasn't able to provide the help you needed. So feel free to utilize those office hours and come in with any questions you have. All right. Everybody have a wonderful week. And I look forward to seeing the progression of your work as we go. All right.